Revolver, August 5th, 1966.
The Beatles Come to America. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Episode 11, Revolver. Welcome to the Beatles Come to America podcast. I am your host, Tom Gouker, along with the Beatles Guru Brooke Halpin. We are at the halfway point of this podcast. It has been such fun reviewing the albums and seeing the progression of sounds in the last 2 years. It's pretty crazy. The Beatles just keep it coming as they drop Revolver, one of the best recordings of all time. It was released in America just 6 weeks after Yesterday and Today was released. Before we get into the show, we do have some housekeeping notes. Just remember that we are a DIY podcast. That means that you may hear some pops and hisses. We are doing this in our living rooms. It is not studio quality. We apologize for any kind of noises that you may hear. And I have a podcast. It's called Something Came from Baltimore, which is a music podcast. It's more jazz, R&B, and blues. It's not really about Baltimore, but we want you to subscribe, and the link is in the show notes. We want you to be a part of that Be More music scene. The Beatles Guru Brooke Halpin, he's all-knowing when it comes to Beatles, and he sweats that Beatle DNA. Follow him on his Facebook page, Come Together with the Beatles and Brooke Halpin. The link is also in the show notes. And we're asking you to get on our Facebook page. It's The Beatles Come to America, and rank the U.S. albums from best to worst. And trust me, it's harder than you think. And we hope you subscribe, participate, enjoy. Just remember, we love the Beatles, so love us in the comments. Believe it or not, we're not making a penny of this podcast. We hope that you enjoy our other projects, all listed in the show notes. It's The Beatles Come to America, Episode 11, The Beatles, Revolver. Revolver, August 5th, 1966.
The Beatles Come to America. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Episode 11, Revolver. Welcome to the Beatles Come to America podcast. I am your host, Tom Gouker, along with the Beatles Guru Brooke Halpin. We are at the halfway point of this podcast. It has been such fun reviewing the albums and seeing the progression of sounds in the last 2 years. It's pretty crazy. The Beatles just keep it coming as they drop Revolver, one of the best recordings of all time. It was released in America just 6 weeks after Yesterday and Today was released. Before we get into the show, we do have some housekeeping notes. Just remember that we are a DIY podcast. That means that you may hear some pops and hisses. We are doing this in our living rooms. It is not studio quality. We apologize for any kind of noises that you may hear. And I have a podcast. It's called Something Came from Baltimore, which is a music podcast. It's more jazz, R&B, and blues. It's not really about Baltimore, but we want you to subscribe, and the link is in the show notes. We want you to be a part of that Be More music scene. The Beatles Guru Brooke Halpin, he's all-knowing when it comes to Beatles, and he sweats that Beatle DNA. Follow him on his Facebook page, Come Together with the Beatles and Brooke Halpin. The link is also in the show notes. And we're asking you to get on our Facebook page. It's The Beatles Come to America, and rank the U.S. albums from best to worst. And trust me, it's harder than you think. And we hope you subscribe, participate, enjoy. Just remember, we love the Beatles, so love us in the comments. Believe it or not, we're not making a penny of this podcast. We hope that you enjoy our other projects, all listed in the show notes. It's The Beatles Come to America, Episode 11, The Beatles, Revolver.
Now, who could this be calling me on a Sunday? I wonder.
Someone who wants to talk about Revolver.
Oh, great. I'm in the mood to do that. Oh, great, Tom. It's always wonderful to be with you.
It is. Today is a very special day. Why is it special?
Oh, my God. Well, we're going to be talking about the Revolver album by the Beatles that was released in August 1966. Oh, boy, I can't wait to get into this one.
I have to admit right up front that this is my #1 album. It is a love fest through the years. I've loved individual songs more than others, but as a whole, I always come back to it as a piece of work. It's my favorite.
Well, it just happens to be mine as well, Tom.
Let's get into it.
Well, the album cover, of course, was created by the good buddy Klaus Vormann, who they met when they used to perform in Hamburg, back in 1960, 61, 62. And then Klaus, of course, went on to be a bass player with John's Plastic Ono Band. And Klaus also played bass with George. I don't know if he ever played bass with Paul, which is interesting. I don't know why. Oh, of course, Paul's a bass player. There you go. But anyhow, the cover is brilliant. It's something we've never seen before, and it's black India ink, they call it. And right away, it's something different. And it's a collage. You've got the large faces of John, Paul, George, and Ringo, and then you have smaller versions of them from when they were younger. You can see it. For instance, you'll see little pictures of George taking off the back of the Rubber Soul album, and John from the back of the Rubber Soul album. So it's a brilliant collage of all many Beatles on top of Beatles. So it's Beatles superimposed with Beatles. The back cover I love just as well, and I'll tell you why. Because when you look at the back cover, Tom, they are so happy. I mean, they're all smiling, especially George and Ringo. They're grinning. But John looks pretty happy, too. And Paul's, he looks all right. But compared to the last album cover that we talked about, that stupid yesterday album cover, this was a huge change. And they're all wearing glasses. John's wearing what was called granny glasses back then, which were very popular. Not only was he wearing them, but the band, the Byrds, used to wear the granny glasses as well. And then Ringo, George, and Paul are wearing the sunglasses. And then John's shirt is really, it's like a paisley shirt, which was a popular style of clothing, back in '66. So some could say that, this back cover was kind of like a psychedelic cover. I wouldn't go that far, but the point is that they were really happy. And I think that the happiness that is portrayed on their faces on the back cover is what we hear, when we get into the individual tracks for the most part, musically. Now, right away, it's the same photographer who took the back photo on Revolver is Robert Whittaker, and he was the one who did the photos of the Busher cover and the trunk cover. So, Robert Whittaker is one of those photographers who has been with the Beatles during this time period quite a bit. So another photo credit to Robert Whittaker for the back cover.
One thing about that back album cover photo is that they look like adults. They don't look like kids anymore, and they look like they're in the studio and they were working. It just seems like a lot of jazz album covers has like them working in the studio kind of look. And it looks like that they're in the studio working, and what they're cooking up is completely different and original. So it has it doesn't look like it's a pin-up thing like for kids to, swoon over the pictures. It's about them working in the studio, and, and this is what we're getting. We're getting Revolver.
When it came out, and I looked at the photo, I just thought that the Beatles looked super cool, extremely cool looking, hip, fab, gear, whatever adjective you want to use. And, they're not holding any instruments or anything. And it's kind of backlit in a way because you've got that light above John's head, which is interesting. And then it doesn't seem to be, there's some other lights off to the right that you don't see, which are backlighting Ringo, George, and Paul. Of course, there was a light in the front as well to get the images lit up too. But it's a beauty. Yeah, Revolver. Yeah, the name of the album, Tom, you know how they came up with that.
Brooke, tell me.
Well, originally they were going to call it Abracadabra, which is a pretty damn good name. But no, they came up with Revolver. And Revolver, of course, is think, well, a revolver is a gun, right? And knowing John and the other three, I don't think that they would be wanting to promote or advocate guns. on this album, or anywhere for that matter. So I think it was something simple as, well, you take out the album and you put it on your turntable, and the album becomes what? A revolver, because it's revolving around the turntable. Very clever. Very simple, but very clever. What a great name for an album at that time.
Just some notes. I know you're going to talk about your life experience with this album, like when you remembered as a child, but a lot of praise, a lot of information. This is the final project before their full retirement. So they stopped doing live performances. It's a focus on some LSD, Eastern philosophy, the avant-garde. And it's the first time that they were doing automatic double tracking, and they brought the mixer into the studio in the mixing board instead of kind of in a control room, so they could do that automatically. It was a very, very popular album, but it declined in sales in America because of the "We're More Popular Than Jesus" quote that came out with John Lennon beforehand. So there was a little backlash, but it didn't really last, because in 1999, the album made it to the Grammy Hall of Fame. The album won Best Album Cover in 1967, so good job, Klaus. It ranked number 1 in the 1998 and the 2000 Colin Hawkins all-time top 100 albums of all time. Rolling Stone ranked it number 3 for the 500 greatest albums of all time. It went double platinum. It's the first album that they spent 220 hours working on. This is the first album where George Martin became a collaborator more than a facilitator. There was uses of the Indian tambura and tabla, the clavichord, the vibraphone, and we have a horn section and sound effects and overdubbing and a lot of good stuff going on. I just wanted to get all that in because it's Marvel. The album has been revered for years and looked at as a piece of work.
Yeah, well, you say that they had retired at this point. Well, actually, they released the album, and then they went on a tour of North America. So they were still performing when this album came out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Look at this faulty information. They didn't want to play any of this stuff because they felt it was too complicated live, though.
That's true. The only thing that they could have played off this album, they could have played Taxman. They could have played Here, There, and Everywhere. But they chose not to. And those are probably the two from the whole list that would lend themselves to a live performance. But they didn't. They chose not to. And, of course, Eleanor Rigby and Yellow Submarine were the two songs that were on this album, and they didn't play them at all, during their tour in '66. But I'll tell you that when this album came out, and I remember buying it and looking at the cover and the back cover and going home and put this on my hi-fi, because that's all I had was a hi-fi. There were no stereo. I didn't have a stereo back then. And I started listening to this album, and I thought, now mind you, prior to this was Yesterday and Today, which pretty much, spearheaded great Beatles songs, although, they were getting advanced with the backward guitar work in I'm Only Sleeping. But, aside from that song, the other songs on Yesterday and Today were fantastic. I love the songs on that album. I'm not so pleased with the album itself. But the point is that I'm listening to this coming off of Yesterday and Today, and then, of course, prior to that was Rubber Soul. And, you hear this really cool 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of thing. And that was super cool, and then all of a sudden, the band jumps in. And then it gets into Eleanor Rigby, which was a mind blower because, there's no guitars and bass and drums. It's a double string quartet. And then we go into Love You Too, which is an classical Indian music piece entirely. it has nothing to do with really the Beatles. It's George Harrison. And then you get into, Here, There, and Everywhere, which is, a beautiful ballad. But the point is that this album, when I heard it for the first time, it was mind-blowing. And of all the Beatle LPs up to this point, this was the best-sounding LP in terms of the way it was recorded, the sound itself, the sound of the guitars, the way the guitars were produced, the way the vocals were done. And I think also that this album, in terms of its sound, is just as relevant today, and even some of the lyrics are just as relevant today as they were when it was released in '66. I had a rock and roll band at the time, and when listening to this album, I thought, well, gee whiz, I guess there's not too much we can play off this album. So it was a turning point, and it was also, as you had said, a turning point for the Beatles, because they were getting tired of touring anyway, and they were putting all their energy into the recording studio, and this obviously is the beginning of their focus entirely on recording and not having to go out and perform any of the songs. Yes, they didn't have to go out and perform live with the songs that they were recording, so their focus was really like they had a freedom now in the recording studio to do things that they didn't have to perform live anywhere.
Let's get into each track. The first one is Taxman, we talked about. Just some notes on it, that this is like kind of a scathing kind of song about being taxed over too much. In Europe, they were getting taxed at like 95%, so it was something crazy like that. It's more or less a protest song. Harold Wilson's Labor government and Edward Heath, the conservative leader of the opposition, both were mentioned in this song, kind of like as a finger up to them. This is kind of like a punk rock 1970s sound of the guitar and bass, and I know you're going to talk about that. The Jam at least stole this riff right off. I'm going to let you talk about this song.
First of all, the album starts off with a George song. This is the first album that starts off with a song that George wrote. Now, granted, Beatles' second album starts off with George singing. He's singing Rule Over Beethoven, but obviously he didn't write that. That was written by Chuck Berry. But this is the first time that George has the opening track that he wrote on this album. So straight away, that's something different. This is a flat-out protest song. He's protesting about the very, very high tax rate that he and his other Beatles and a lot of his friends were getting buried by, from as you mentioned, the government in England at the time. A 95% tax rate is crazy high. What's fascinating about this is that even though George wrote it, he doesn't play the lead guitar solo. That's Paul playing that lead guitar, and it's an amazing lead guitar solo. It's incredible. And not only is Paul's lead guitar playing great during the solo, and also as the song fades out, Paul's riffing. Paul's bass line is phenomenal. And of course, George does play a second lead guitar, but he's not soloing. What's interesting too is that he starts off the song with "Let me tell you how it will be," and when you go further down the album, he has a song called "I Want to Tell You." So George, there's a connection lyrically, obviously, between "Let me tell you" and "I want to tell you." He has things that he wants to say, evidently. And the first one is Taxman, and he was not at all pleased that Ringo's drumming might be some of his best drumming ever, with the Beatles, certainly. And John's contribution is he's playing rhythm guitar, but you hear it, and he does some backing vocals. But this is really a George Harrison, Paul McCartney track, as far as I'm concerned. And it's a brilliant way to start the album.
Our next song is Eleanor Rigby, and it's a narrative about the perils of loneliness. And Lennon and Harrison does harmonies, but it's a string octet. It's inspired by the movie Psycho, and when I did that research, I went, Psycho, I can kind of get that.
Well, this is a Paul song, as you'd mentioned, and it's very unlike Paul lyrically. You know, Paul's this happy-go-lucky guy, and here he is, you know, writing this song about loneliness. And it's a very, very sad song. So we go from George's protest song, which, by the way, Paul's lead guitar solo is rather Indian influenced. Might want to mention that, which, of course, put a big smile on George's face. But with Eleanor Rigby, it's, you know, there's no Beatles that play on it, as you had said. And yes, the strings are played in a style called staccato, which means that it's like the bow is actually hitting the strings. So the strings almost sound percussive, which is interesting. And of course, that's George Martin who did all that, wanting to portray, I believe, sort of like the pain in the lyrics. I mean, these are very painful, very sad lyrics. I mean, everybody's sad. You know, nobody's happy in this song. She's wearing a face that she keeps in the jar by the door. Who is it for? I mean, that's flat out poetry. And what a great lyric. What does it mean? She's wearing a face that she keeps in a jar by the door. I have no idea. I don't know. And, you know, again, back then when the album came out, it was just the sound of the songs on the album. No one really, none of my friends, and myself included, we weren't sitting around analyzing the lyrics of these songs. You know, we were just blown away by the way the songs sounded. And it's also interesting that Eleanor Rigby would be paired with Yellow Submarine as a double-sided single, double A side, they call it, because you couldn't get any more extreme. It's the antithesis. Yellow Submarine is the antithesis of Eleanor Rigby, because Yellow Submarine it's irresistible fun. You know, they're just having a blast. So you go from the sadness and the loneliness of Rigby, and you turn the single over, and you've got Ringo and the lads having a total hoot, laughing it up, and we'll get into that. But yeah, Rigby, of course, is a masterpiece, and to this day, it continues to be a masterpiece.
Our next song is Love You Too, a really intense world song. I don't think any Beatle fan who, you know, bought the lunch boxes, the mop top hair, would think a Beatles would come out with a song like this. What's your thought on this song?
I have a lot to say about this song. George has the opening track, and we're on to the third song, and it's another George Harrison original. Wow. Because up to this point, George only had one song on U.S. releases. Only one. And in some cases, he had zero. He would sing a song that maybe John or Paul wrote, or he would do cover songs. He would sing a song by Carl Perkins, for example, or Chuck Berry. But, oh, wow, so George has got two songs already. You're only up to track 3. Now, the title in and of itself is bizarre. Love You Too. But the 2 is spelled T-O. If it was spelled T-O-O, then that would mean, oh, I love you also. But no, it's only one O. So what the hell is that? It's not a misprint. What it is, in my opinion, is that you know that this album and some of the work on Yesterday and Today, they're getting into the whole backwards thing. You know, they loved it. They loved the whole backward recording technique. Well, if you take the title, Love to You, you know, I want to make love to you, that kind of thing. Well, instead of Love to You, George did a backward thing and made it Love You Too. That's the only explanation, because grammatically it just doesn't make any sense with one O. And I don't know anyone who's talked about that, so I wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. There's no John on this track, which is interesting. Because John, I guess, I don't know, you know, how much of a of the Indian music fan he was, really. I don't think he really was a big Indian music fan. He was into, of course, he got into the Indian philosophy because of George, only to find out that, John would write off the Maharishi, as someone who used the Beatles. So it doesn't surprise me. So there's no John on this song at all. It's just George, and it's Indian musicians. There's no bass, there's no, there are guitars, and there's no drums. The drum is being played there were some musicians from, as you had mentioned, the Asian Music Circle, which was an organization where Indian musicians in London were members of. And that's where George was able to bring the Indian musicians in to Abbey Road. And the tabla player, he's the drummer. That's the Indian drums, small drums called the tabla. Anil Bhagwat is playing the tabla. And he is the only credited outside musician on this album, and the first one to be credited on an album in the Beatles catalog thus far, even though we had John Scott playing, I think it was John Scott, playing the alto and tenor flute on You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. So it's George playing the sitar, acoustic guitar, rhythm guitar, and he plays an amazing fuzz-tone lead guitar on the chorus, which sounds like a bloody buzzsaw. It's just an incredible sound. They're not very happy. Again, this is another protest song. There's people standing ground who'll screw you in the ground. My Lord, that's not a very a very happy lyric. So with the lyrics on Love You Too, George was really speaking to and it's about the anti-establishment is what I'm saying. And so it was very appropriate and popular at that time for all the Beatles fans. It really made a lot of sense, and George absolutely nailed it lyrically.
The song's a total surprise, and then you put that buzzsaw that you're talking about, that's unheard of, and it's wild.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's very progressive for anything that was going on. Right now, we have 3 tracks into it, and everything's completely different, and everything's completely amazing. And we go right into another amazing song, which is Here, There, and Everywhere, where this is a Paul song, and it's inspired by... He listened to Pet Sounds before it came out, and God Only Knows. So this is kind of his spin on that. It's one of those songs that millions of people have copied over. Art Garfunkel said this is his favorite song of all time. Covers from Count Basie, Claudine Langette, Andy Williams, Jose Feliciano. They all had minor hits on it, during that time period, right as soon as the song got released.
We had talked about how Mr. McCartney wanted Jane to be with him all the time. And because she had her own acting career, that was impossible for Jane to do. So what does he do? He writes a song saying, I want her everywhere. I want her here, there, and everywhere. Which, knowing what was going on with Jane and Paul at the time, was a dream. It was an impossibility. And that lyric is actually quite possessive for a love ballad, because this is obviously a love ballad. But to say, hey, you know what? I want you here. I want you there. I want you everywhere. It's rather a demand. It's rather demanding, and it's very possessive. It's one of the most beautiful love ballads that Paul ever wrote. There's an exquisite introduction, which is kind of like what they used to do, years before with the Tin Pan Alley Riders. So it's a bit of a throwback that way in terms of the intro. And what's also interesting is that, and I don't know why this is happening, but, John, again, on this song, you would think that he would be playing a beautiful guitar part, at least a beautiful rhythm guitar part. But no, Paul plays the rhythm guitar. Paul, of course, plays the bass. Ringo on light drumming, not very, very light drumming. And then George plays an exquisite lead guitar on this track. The background vocals are some of the best background vocals ever recorded by the Beatles. Just exquisite background vocals. And of course, that's John and that's George together, and they did a phenomenal job with the way they sing the background vocals. The thing that George does on the guitar is it's almost like a classical riff. It's what they call counterpoint. It's a contrapuntal line that George plays. It's also chromatic. It goes step by step. It's brilliant. I didn't know anybody who was doing that, and I don't know if George Martin was the one who had anything to do with that or not, but boy, what a job that Mr. Harrison did on this guitar work. His choice of notes were just absolutely brilliant. And so as far as I'm concerned, this song to me is on a scale of 1 to 10, it's an 11.
Leads us to a children's song that spawned a whole industry. There's a movie, there's cartoon figures, there's a #1 single. What's good about this song, in my opinion, and I thought about it, right now the Beatles fans who started out in '64 are growing older. And when you talk about Yellow Submarine, you're reaching down to like 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, people who are drawn to that song that may not even know who the Beatles were. And that draws them right into the collection of the Beatles. So what they were able to do is capture a new generation right where they're at the peak of their abilities. And it's genius in a sense, because you just gained yourself like a whole new generation of fans. This song was written by John and Paul, and Donovan had his hands in it. The brass band section where the band began to play was the Sousa Marching Band. It's just a file. It was in the EMI library that they grabbed. Lennon does the old vaudevillian shtick on it. They wanted it to be goofy and fun. It was a great vehicle for Ringo. I don't think anyone, when they wrote this song, that they thought this would have legs like it does. This is considered super, super classic Beatles song.
When you listen to it, even to this present day, it's irresistible fun. Absolutely. I mean, they're having so much fun on the recording of this. You can hear it. It's just oozing in tracks. They're hysterical. It's a total blast. And it was Paul's idea. Paul was the one who came up for the song. It was his idea for the song. He wanted to write a children's song, and he thought it would be good for Ringo to sing it. John, I believe, participated with some of the lyrics, and then, of course, you mentioned Donovan Leitch, the famous Donovan who did Mellow Yellow and Sunshine Superman. He came up with the sky of blue and the sea of green, so he gets the credit for that lyric. Yellow Submarine, and we're, again, now, when you look at just what we've covered thus far, it's like, what the hell's going on? Because we went from a protest song to a sad song about Eleanor Rigby, to an Indian song, and then we went to a beautiful ballad, and now we're going into a children's song. It's like, what the hell's going on with this album in terms of continuity? Because when you go back to Rubber Soul, the songs have an overall continuity. That album has an overall continuity to it. This album, with the variety that we've heard thus far, is the precursor to the White Album. You think about that. Because that's how diverse the songs are. Of course, the White Album has the most diversity of any Beatle recording. And we're only up to 5, and now we have a children's song. The thing that's really fun about it is not only, the John and Paul, yakking away, and actually John and Paul are talking through tin cans. Also, you've got this, as you mentioned, the brass band. And the brass band is actually, it's similar to the sound of Coming Up, with Sgt. Pepper. So it's interesting to see how this is sort of the beginning of using a brass band on a Beatles song. And the other thing that is fascinating to me are the background vocals. Who's singing on the chorus? I mean, the chorus is the list of singers on the chorus. It's like a who's who here. I mean, you got Mal Evans, the roadie, and not only is he singing, but he's playing the bass drum toward the end of the song. George Martin is actually singing on this track. It might be the only track in the entire catalog where George Martin and Jeff Emmerich singing, Neil Aspinall singing, Pattie Boyd, she will be singing on some other songs as well, and Marianne Faithfull, who was, of course, a successful recording artist in her own right, Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones, and here's the real kicker right here, Brian Epstein, their manager. Brian, I didn't even know he could sing a note. He's singing on the chorus as well. That is just, to me, is so extraordinary. It was a party. It was a party atmosphere, and the party atmosphere comes through, and everybody loves this song, and that's why it was such a big hit.
Okay, we are at She Said, She Said. Harrison helped Lennon out on this song, kind of bash it apart. It's 3 separate fragments of song ideas that he had. I don't know how he fixed it. She said.
There's many things that are interesting about this Lennon penned song. He's the title straight away. The title is, you would think it would just be She Said. No. The title is She Said, She Said. So straight away, it's like, okay, what's going on with that? That's very unusual. In August '65, when the Beatles were out in Beverly Hills having a pool party. And yeah, the Byrds were there, and Ringo and George and John were tripping on LSD, and Peter Fonda showed up. He was tripping on LSD. And he went up to John and whispered in his ear, I know what it's like to be dead. And John's tripping on acid, and that's the last thing you want to hear. You want to have a good time. And, John thought it was just a total drag, and he told Peter to basically, screw off and bugger off and leave me alone. But, of course, that was the seed for John to come up with this amazing song. It is an amazing song. The sound of the guitars on this song are incredible. I don't know what the hell they were doing. And, they were experimenting with, they were still using Voxes. I know that Vox, they were coming up with new amplifiers regularly for the Beatles. New amps, not so much the speaker cabinets, but the innards of the amplifiers themselves, different effects, different tones, and different settings. And I think that the Vox amps come through loud and clear, certainly on this song. And I have to say that Ringo's drumming is phenomenal. I mentioned before how Ringo's drumming on this record, I think, is the best drumming he ever did in his entire life. But you listen to the drums on She Said, he is absolutely incredible. Now, this is a trio. There's no Paulie. Paul's gone. They had a fight, and Paul stormed off. So Paul's nowhere. He doesn't. There's nothing. There's no contribution from Paul on She Said, which is amazing when you listen to it. You would think, God, that must be him playing the bass, but no, it's George playing a 6-string bass. And, of course, George is playing the lead guitar as well and singing harmony with John because, Paul was gone. John has got the rhythm guitar going, which sounds incredible, and then he does some overdubbing with the Hammond organ. But one of the things that makes this a very strange album, as you were alluding to, is that there's different sections of the song, and there's different tempos in the song. the tempo changes from a straight 4/4. 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, bum, da 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 dee dum, bum, bum. It's all 4/4 time. Da 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 dee da 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 da. Okay, but then when you get into the bridge, it goes into a waltz, which is again very unexpected, and it's not triplets like they did in We Can Work It Out. It actually goes into 3/4 time. No, and that's the part, where he's going, no, 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 you're wrong. When I was a 4, 2, 3, everything was a 1, 2, 3, everything was a 1, 2, 3, and then boom, back into 4/4 time. Seamless. You wouldn't know that there was a change in the time signature unless somebody like me could tell you that there was. And it was seamless, and part of the reason why it's seamless is because of Ringo's drumming. That's one reason why you can't even barely hear the difference in the time change. Brilliant. It's absolutely genius. And then the end of the song, it goes into double time. It goes into twice as fast. I know what it's like. Which they did, by the way, that double time rhythm. They did that at the end of Take It to Ride. So it's nothing new, but it does work perfectly on the song. I think that this is one of John's absolute best songs he ever wrote. I'll go so far as saying that. And I think it might be underrated. That's how brilliant I think this song is.
We're over on side 2 with Good Day Sunshine. It's a Paul song. Piano solo has a ragtime style of Scott Joplin, and there was great covers on this right away with Lulu and Gloria Learning and the Arbor.
So, all right. So before we flip the album over, I just wanted to mention that when you look at side 1, Taxman, Eleanor Rigby, Love You Too, Here, There, and Everywhere, Yellow Submarine. What a way to end side 1, she said. Okay, we turn the record over, and now we hear this boom, 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 growing and building this piano just around. And then these vocals. Now, what's amazing about the vocals is the chorus, Good Day Sunshine, is in 7/4 time. And nobody, 7/4 time is a time signature that was used by Indian musicians and was used by some jazz musicians. And no one used 7/4 in 1966, all right? So the 7/4 is really a bar of 2 and a bar of 5. Good Day is 2 beats, and then Sunshine is 5 beats. So you got good, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good day, sun, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good day. So this was total innovation. The innovation continues. Is just so, I keep saying mind-blowing, but ear-opening, I guess would be another way of saying it. Mind-expanding is another way of saying it. We're hearing things that we never heard before. 7/4 time? What the hell is that? And the influence by the Lovin' Spoonful is What a Day for a Daydream. And this is a minimal. It's a minimal production. There's no guitars to speak of, really, on Good Day Sunshine. Supposedly John Lennon plays some guitar, but I don't hear it. I don't know why that's the case. Maybe he didn't want to play this, because there seemed to be, as we're going through this, you can hear that John is not playing guitar or keyboards on a number of these songs on Revolver, which I don't understand. I don't understand that. So Paul, he's playing the piano, of course, plays a great piano and bass. And Mr. Harrison is playing, he's not playing anything. He's just clapping his hands. So there's no guitars on this song, Tom, which is really bizarre considering, how guitar-centric the Beatles were up until this point. And actually coming off of She Said at the end of side 1, which is very guitar-dominated and guitar-centric. to go to this song, which is just piano, bass, and drums. That's all it is. You know, there's some hand claps, okay, you know, okay. And then there's an overdub, as you mentioned, that George Martin plays the piano solo. It's a great track. It's innovative. It's an irresistible song as well. And I think it's a great way to start off side two.
And the next song is For No One, another song for Jane Asher. Thank God for Jane Asher. She's provided us with a lot of source material for a lot of good songs for Paul. Here he's playing the bass, piano, the clavichord. There's a movie called Darling from 1965 as a John Schlesinger film. Basically had that as an influence for this song. And then millions of people did covers for this because it's really dramatic. And Cecilia Black had a hit off of it. Liza Minnelli had a hit. The Letterman recorded it, but there's hundreds of people that recorded this song.
Is another completely different new song for the Beatles. We'd never heard anything like this before. New. For No One. This is another sad song that Paul wrote on the album. This is about Jane. He wants the love to continue, but he says that when he looks in her eyes, you know, basically that the love is dead, which is really very, very, that's a very heavy lyric for Paul McCartney in 1966. He knows that it's basically finished, but he thinks that she still needs him, you know, which is really kind of a complete twist on these lyrics. And also, which is very, very important, is that the ending is very unresolved musically. It ends on what they call a 5 chord, which is usually the chord that you hear before it resolves to the tonic or the root chord. So it leaves you in suspense. In other words, which is perfect because you don't really know what's going on, what's going to happen with this relationship. And that was a brilliant way to end the song. And boy, if that was Paul's idea, my God. I mean, that's genius. I don't know if it was Paul or George Martin's, but brother, that is just incredible to end the song suspended like that. This is the farthest thing you're so far away from rock and roll. My God, this is a classical or Baroque sounding song, which again, on a new Beatle album, talk about variety and eclecticism of material. Wow.
At the next song, I Want to Tell You, it's another George song, and this has an amazing sense of dissonance to it. I love this. I think it's awesome. I really like John and Paul doing the background vocals with Paul hitting the high notes up there. Like he's tackling the high notes, kind of changes the whole sound of the song. I love the piano like dissonance, like the
oh yeah.
It's another example of a really cool Harrison song. The production value of this song just escalates this song into something that some of his solo work didn't. But that's my thought. What's your thought on this song?
Well, there's a number of things that we need to address. Number one, wait a minute. Did you say that this is another George Harrison song on a Beatles album? Am I hearing things correctly, Tom? Is this the third song that George has? What's going on here? Well, I said earlier, if he was lucky, he would have one on U.S. albums. Now he has 3, not 2. So it goes from 1 or 0 to 3. This is a huge breakthrough for George as a writer. Are you kidding me? That has to be mentioned straight off. So I believe that these lyrics were a result of George tripping. And he was overwhelmed with all these thoughts, but he couldn't sort them out, to actually get them down and express them properly. He wanted to. He wants to tell you, but he can't, which is really a yin-yang. It's a black and white. It's the opposite. It's going on. The opposite's going here. And once again, we've got John and no guitar on the George song. Now, this is not because Paul McCartney is being the musical director on the George Harrison song. I don't know why. Again, John could have played a beautiful guitar track with George on this. Nope. He does do some harmony, and he plays the tambourine, and they're all doing the hand claps. So, so that's nothing new. So, back to that same point about John not participating with his guitars or keyboards. The other thing is, as you had mentioned, at the end of the song, that Paul's vocals, he does a high vocal. And what it's like Indian scat singing, which is, again, the Indian influence that was occurring, not only of course, with George, but, McCartney picked up on it, and he was doing that. Of course, he would do it more so on a George song than on a John or one of his own songs. And then you got Paul, who's playing that, which, as you mentioned, is a very dissonant piano. And what a brilliant idea, because, in rock and roll, you don't lay onto that dissonant chord. You might go pass through it. You'll pass through it in jazz quickly, passing tones, they call it. But to lay into it, is again, innovative, something new, something different. And it's not one of my favorite songs by George. I do like it very much, but I'm glad it's on the album. And the guitar riff, though, I must say, is outstanding. Great guitar riff.
That also has a fade-in intro.
Yeah.
So they tried that again. It's great effect, great song. Got to Get You in My Life is a wild song. It's a Motown influence song. It's after they saw Stevie Wonder at the Scotch St. James nightclub.
Yeah, famous club in London.
Yeah, they used Georgie Fame's The Blue Flames as the horns on it. Paul's saying it's an ode to pot. It should have been famous immediately. They should have released it as a single. It's a hit. They released it in 1975 on the rock and roll album. The song's not rock and roll, it's an R&B song. It hit the top 10. And then Earth, Wind & Fire turned around and released it from the Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts Club Band movie soundtrack, and it hit again in the top 10 just 3 years later in 1978. So the song has legs. The song is a classic in any way, completely different than anything they've done up to this point. And they've never really duplicated this sound again, I think. Am I wrong by saying that this should have been a single? And isn't this like a music explosion? Like, you've never heard anything like this from the Beatles ever. And even though it would be like a tribute to the Motown sound, it doesn't sound like Motown. It's a funk song. It's a R&B song, but it's their interpretation of what Motown is. It's great. And it just blows me away, and it's a clean sound. The recording is awesome, and the horns are awesome. It's a brilliant song. It's in my top 10 of their songs of all time.
Well, when I heard Got to Get You Into My Life, a number of things happened. I said, oh, obviously, Paul's talking about a girl. Maybe it's Jane, maybe it's not Jane. Definitely he's talking about a girl. And then the other thing is that what the hell's going on with these brass instruments? As you had said, that this was, something quite new and quite different. McCartney's vocal is phenomenal on this. It's almost kind of like a Little Richard. So in a way, listen, Paul, John, George, and Ringo, are white guys from Northern England and Liverpool. They could be influenced by Stevie Wonder. They could be influenced by the Motown sound, the Temptations, and everything else. But they're still white guys. So that's why you say, well, they were influenced by it, and they're using the brass instruments, the trumpets, and the saxophones. But even though Paul's trying to sing like a black guy, it's not possible. And that goes back to Plastic Soul, which we talked about on the previous show, and which turned into Rubber Soul, right? So it's very interesting, that you had mentioned that. I just wanted to pick up on that. No John, on Got to Get You Into My Life, it says here that he plays rhythm guitar. I don't hear it. I don't hear any rhythm guitar on it. I know that Harrison's lead guitar is phenomenal on this track. You know, it's almost as if everyone, Paul, well, let's just say Paul, George, and Ringo, I think musically that they were at the top of their game on this album. Absolutely. John, not so much. Not so much, which is really, you know, kind of strange. I don't know why he wasn't more out there as a musician, keeping up with McCartney's musical prowess, which is that of a musical genius, because they were competitive in a healthy way. You know, I would think that John would have said, "Oh yeah, if you want to, you did that. You think you played a good lead guitar solo. Well, listen to this, Paulie." You know, or something like that. You know, the friendly competition that would go on between them, it didn't happen, and that's a disappointment. Because as great as this album is, just imagine if John had participated more on the tracks. It's just a thought, just a thought. But getting back to this song, as you said, years later, I mean, I didn't know. I said, well, it's about a girl. You got to get you into my life, you know. I was alone. I took a ride. I didn't know what I would find there, you know. And suddenly, et cetera. So, and then we find out that it's about Paul having to have pot every day, which is a disappointment, to be honest with you. You know, I mean, I'm no prude, don't get me wrong. But to think that he's singing about having to have marijuana every day is really, that's really a letdown.
When we heard the anthology version of Got to Get You Into My Life, it was completely different, and John was on there, you know, strong.
Yeah.
Paul's vision, he went right to George Martin and said, this is what I want, because the evolution of that song completely changed. I enjoyed hearing it on the anthology, but boy, is it completely different to what the final product was.
Absolutely, and it's much better as well.
We love that tease. And we're up to the final song on this album, Tomorrow Never Knows. I know that there's a cool version, and Junior Parker and Phil Collins. Tomorrow Never Knows is a story in itself, and take it away.
Okay, so here I was saying, gee, I wish there was more John participation on this album. Whoa! He heard me. And what a way to end this album. John ends, coincidentally, he ends side one, right, with She Said, She Said, and then he ends the entire record with Tomorrow Never Knows. The title is extremely profound. The title, you don't hear the title in any of the lyrics, which is interesting. The sound of the song is unparalleled. It was unparalleled. It was unheard of to do something like this in '66. No one going forward from today until the end of time will be able to do what they did. This is an electronic piece of music that combines Indian music with electronic music, with Ringo's amazing, thundering drum pattern. Again, I cannot stress how phenomenal Ringo's drumming is on this entire record. The lyrics, John was reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which actually Timothy Leary, it was Timothy Leary book, the psychology, the psychological explanation, a manual, the Living Dead, right. So based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, that's the title. So, you know, John was reading it, and he was taking LSD, and he comes up with these lyrics and this idea for the song. The song is it's on one note, one key, which is C, which is the drone. So again, the Indian influence. You've got George droning on the Indian tambura on the C. Paul is doubling that same drone on the bass. The bass note, for Paul McCartney not to move around on the neck of the bass is highly unusual. But he knew that in keeping with the Indian element of this song, that that's what he had to do. There's backward lead guitar solo in this song, played by McCartney. So you got Paul playing the backward lead guitar solo. You've got John. He does play the Hammond organ and he plays the mellotron. No guitar. And then George is playing sitar, and I mentioned the tambora. It says here lead guitar, but I've been told, and I believe, listening to it, if you listen to the lead solo that Paul plays on Taxman, it's the same sound. It's the same tone setting. It's the same style of guitar playing. So I say that's Mr. McCartney playing the lead guitar solo on Taxman. Excuse me, on Tomorrow Never Knows. Now, then there's something called tape loops. Now, Paul had a lot to do with this, which is interesting, because you would think that this would be John's idea. But Paul was very much into the avant-garde and the avant-garde scene that was going on in London, because Paul was living in London. John was out on the outskirts, down south. And Paul was the one who was also listening to Stockhausen and Berio and all these other advanced composers, quote-unquote serious classical composers. And they were listening to Pierre Henry, and these were composers who were recording what's called musique concrète. And so it was Paul's idea to come up with the tape loops, and they all came up with tape loops, including Ringo, which is a first. I wouldn't think of Ringo getting involved, with electronic music necessarily, given his taste in music. But, that's how they were all working very tightly, and as a four-piece ensemble on John's masterpiece. The song, as I said, happens to be one of my favorites, and I know that John wanted it to sound like 1,000 chanting monks, Tibetan monks, like on top of the Himalayan mountains or something. You don't get that effect, because if that was the case, there would have been a chorus of voices. You don't have that effect. But he did want to sound like he was, singing like the Dalai Lama. I don't think he's singing like the Dalai Lama. But they did do things. I know that Jeff Emmerich tried to do something with his voice, so they took up the microphone and they ran John's voice through some of the verses through the Leslie speaker cabinet to give it this, spacey, spaced out, more advanced, something different vocal. And I think that satisfied John to a point, but John never really got what he wanted with this song, believe it or not, which is what I have read about Mr. John Lennon saying a number of times. This song will go down in history as the most unusual, most advanced recording that the Beatles ever did, certainly to date. And even, I think, even beyond, even when you get into this psychedelic period you get into Strawberry Fields Forever and some of the songs from 1967. This is just a mind blower. So advanced, so it's a standalone. It doesn't sound like anything else. The working title for this song, by the way, was Mark I, and the other title was The Void. We have to take a look at Mark I, because Mark I is a chapter in the Bible. And there's been some talk, some discussions about, now why would John call this Mark I? And I don't know, I've heard the story, supposedly, and it has to do with, his take on religion, but at the same time, he believed that Catholicism was over. So I'm sure that that's one reason why he didn't continue to use the title Mark I, and he settled on Tomorrow Never Knows. And the fact of the matter is that John knew, as well as you and I know, tomorrow never knows. to this very day. And that's something that can be said until the end of time, because no one really knows what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone what's going to happen in the next hour. So it's a total masterpiece, and to end the album with Tomorrow Never Knows is the best way to end this album. I also wanted to mention about Tomorrow Never Knows that this is one of the first songs where the lyrics don't rhyme. There's no rhyme pattern at all to the lyrics. And it doesn't matter. No one ever said, hey, wait a minute. Whoa, wait, John. That last line doesn't rhyme with the next line or the third line. So again, very, very progressive for 1966 and even for today.
This Mark I, I'm glad that they didn't call it that because, again, it was that time period where he said that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus Christ.
Exactly.
So you did the Mark I, that's just more of a dig in. And the Revolver blew up all over the world except for America because of the Beatle burnings. It did well. I mean, it's a double platinum album. It was a dip from Rubber Soul. It didn't do as well. But it stayed at number one for 6 weeks. So it was yesterday and today was 5 weeks. And then Revolver bumped it and had 6 weeks. So the lasting effect is 50 years later. It's in my opinion and your opinion, it's the best Beatle album. So that has a lot to say. So as a whole, I never heard another album. I cannot compare this to another album at all. And I think it's pop perfection.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to address the Mark I again, because there's a Mark I in the Bible actually talks about John the Baptist, okay, preparing the way. And of course, we know what happened with John the Baptist, and a very, very sad ending to his life. He was beheaded. So that's bizarre in and of itself, because knowing what happened to John, 14 years later, very, very strange that he would even mention it as a working title. Good God, that is something. I mentioned before, Tom, that now that we look at the title, let's just take a look at each track, please. All right? Let's look at each track here and talk about eclecticism. I was mentioning that earlier. This, as I said, no doubt, in my opinion, is the most eclectic record to date. The songs are very different. I mean, you've got Love You Too, you've got Yellow Submarine, you've got to Get You Into My Life, you've got She Said, you've got Tomorrow Never Knows. These are all very, very different songs, and yet the sequencing, I must admit, is brilliant, the way it's put together. And coming off of the 2 previous albums, this was a huge signal that things were changing in the Beatle camp. Whenever they were in the recording studio, it was like, oh boy, what are they going to do next? So this is a prelude to the eclecticism which occurs big time on the White Album. Obviously, we know what happens between this and the White Album, and we'll talk about Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour as we continue with your show, as we talk about the Beatles coming to America for the first time and the albums that go along with that.
There's one other thing is that there's a single that could have, both of those songs could have made it on this album, which is Paperback Writer, which never got released on an album, and the B-side was Rain. And not to tell anyone, but I think Rain is my favorite song of the Beatles catalog, just because of the backward masking and that everyone has a part. The drumming is great, the bass playing, guitar playing is just perfect song. But those 2 songs could have easily fit onto Revolver. It would have matched, I guess, the time period and the creativity of what they were going through. It's okay that they weren't, because the album was just jam-packed with good songs anyways, but it's just to be noted that this is the time period. This is a double A side that didn't really work. I think Paperback Writer hit #1, and Rain was in the top 20.
Yeah, Paperback Writer was at #1. I want to mention, as I was talking earlier about how I wish there was more John going on in this record, when you look at the UK release, there's a lot more John on the record. Because that on the UK release, which we're talking about I'm Only Sleeping, we're talking about Dr. Robert, right? Those two songs were held back. They were not included on this because Capitol had already released them on the previous album on Yesterday and Today.
And,
so
and Your Bird Can Sing, another John song.
And Your Bird Can Sing is the other one. Thank you. So that's one reason why there's not as much John on the U.S. Revolver, because they released those 3 songs on the previous album, which really, again, in terms of the balance, you don't have nearly as much John on the U.S. version. You take those 3 songs off, and it's mostly McCartney and Harrison. I mean, that's it. John only has 2 songs on the U.S. version, if I'm correct. He only has She Said, and Tomorrow Never Knows, which is mind-boggling for John Lennon. That's correct, isn't it? John only has 2 songs on Revolver. Can you believe that?
Yeah, it's weird. It's at that point where when we got the UK pressing, it became a part of our lifestyle. I wasn't prepared for it. Revolver is such an album, a very personal album to me. I love this album. The fact that then I was listening to the UK version, which is the original version they wanted us to hear, and it tripped me up for a really long time. I wasn't prepared because I knew these songs in order of the U.S. version, and it had me taken back. But yeah, three John songs got ripped apart and went right over to Yesterday and Today.
I mean, for God's sake, John must have been really angry about that. This is, he's the leader, original leader, the leader of the Beatles. It was his band to begin with, going back to the early days of the Quarrymen. And here's this incredible album, and he knew what this album was going to be a huge game changer. And for him to have 2 songs on this album, I'm surprised he didn't really do something about that on the U.S. version. Really, come to think of it, John. John. Hello, John. Is that you, John? Tom. Really, that's really quite startling.
And it all stopped. So we'll hear this on Sgt. Pepper as the cutting and pasting of Capitol Records comes to an end, more or less. We have some trauma with Yellow Submarine soundtrack that I will cry about, but more or less the whole stealing is kind of gone, and we go right into Sgt. Pepper. And
that's correct.
That's an epic and a half to talk about also. So it's going to be exciting to talk about that album also with you.
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, I may have to get out my Dayglow Sgt. Pepper uniform for that interview.
Yeah, I wish you would. All righty. Well, thank you very much. The Beatle Guru, Brooke Halpin. It's the Beatles Come to America. We just completed Revolver, and we are giving it a thumbs up. No reason to rank anything. It's #1 on both of our lists.
Absolutely. Tom, thanks so much. I really enjoyed having these wonderful shows with you. Thanks again, and I look forward to moving on to the next one.
You got it. All right. That was good. That was almost 2 hours.
Was it really? No.
1 hour. No. 1 hour and 50 minutes I have right now. Yeah. We started.
Really?
Yeah, we started at. I may have turned the thing over for you. And now it's an hour and 40 minutes. Yeah. We talked.
Yeah.
But gee, it's Revolver. I knew it was going to be long.
Oh yeah.
Why?
There's so much to talk about.
Why wasn't Got to Get You Into My Life released as a single? What's the hold up? That song smells like a hit. Like, where does the Beatle world say, let's move to the next one?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, because in terms of their single releases, as you'd mentioned, they did Rain, Paperback Writer, and then they did Eleanor Rigby and Yellow Submarine in that order. So the summer of '66, the airwaves were dominated by Yellow Submarine everywhere, and also Eleanor Rigby. And then they ended their tour, and then they went dark. There were no releases. There were no performances. Nobody knew what they were doing. Everybody went off on their own direction. George went to India for 6 weeks. John went to Spain to be an actor in How I Won the War. Paul McCartney was composing a soundtrack to The Family Way. And Ringo was staying at home. So then we don't hear anything, and all the rumors began. Oh, the Beatles are finished. Huh? No more. There's no more. They broke up. They must have broken up. Because we were used to getting singles in '64 and '65. We were spoiled. And now we don't hear anything. And so that's why the rumors started. We didn't hear anything until February of '67, when Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane came out.
And in theory, that's really not a long time in our world now. I mean, it's nothing. But in Beatle world, where they're pumping out one song after another, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, that was 8 months. Mm-hmm. So that's why all the rumors started. People thought, that's it, they're done. And that's also when people came up with the conspiracy theory back in '69, and just the reason why there was nothing happening was because McCartney had died in the car crash, and all this stuff that was going on back then. But we can talk about that some other time.
Yep, let's do it.
Okay, Tom.
All righty. Well, that was fun.
So let's take a look at the calendar. I'm guessing, given our routine, that, let's see, I'm going to be busy on Tuesday, Monday, Wednesday. Yeah, is Wednesday good? Well, let's just keep the same one, right?
Yeah, I'm good with Wednesday.
2 o'clock Pepper, huh? Oh, boy.
Yep,
that's going to be it's going to be a long one. Yeah, that'll be a long one. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, Tom.
All right, we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The next episode, The Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Now enjoy an original Brooke Halpin composition, Down the Drain.
Rain is acid on my skin, melting me till I turn into puddles thick with black dirt flowing, dirty water in the gutter. Down the drain, down the drain, it's gonna get better. Down the drain, it's gonna get better, better. Cardboard beds and cement pillows lying on the streets half dead. My aching eyes are filled with sorrow. Every day souls go unfed. Down the drain, it's gonna get better. Down the drain, it's gonna get better, better, better. Used to be that everyone was up on love. Life was good for all of us, but somehow we lost the touch. Down the drain.
End of episode.